Hi, everybody. Welcome to the New York Comic Con virtual panel, Will Eisner, The Next Generation. The title is kind of self-explanatory, but let me explain it. As the panel description in your guide, Will Eisner innovated comics in the golden age with the spirit and jump-started the modern graphic novel with Contract with God and then many other graphic novels. Having inspired multiple generations of creators, Eisner is still a major influence on today's writers and artists of, as he called it, sequential art. Today, three of the top graphic novelists working in the medium, Gene Yang, Jerry Craft, and Dan Schkade, talk about how Eisner has inspired and impacted their work and why more than ever Will Eisner still moderates. Why Will Eisner still matters. I'm Danny Fingeroth and I'm moderating. And I'm not going to read that whole thing over, so we'll just leave that adorable mistake in. I'm Danny Fingeroth. I was a writer and editor at Marvel Comics for years when you were children, and I am the chair of Will Eisner Week, which is an annual celebration of Will Eisner every March. And if you're interested in that, go to willeisner.com and you'll find out about putting on your own event or to see the videos of events we've done with some of these actual people right here in the past and others. But let me introduce them. And I actually have introductions ready for everybody.
Hey.
Okay. And by the way, in the background, you can't see him, is Dr. Travis Langley, who is an author and editor and educator of comics and superheroes and notably Batman. And he is working the magic behind the scenes. So thank you, Travis. Anyway, Jerry Craft is the New York Times best-selling and Newbery Medal-winning author of the graphic novels New Kid and Class Act. And we can see the cover of one of them right behind him by an amazing coincidence. Craft is also the creator of Mama's Boys, an award-winning comic strip which won the African American Literary Award 5 times. Give somebody else a chance. He is a co-founder of the Schomburg Center's annual Black Comic Book Festival, and he received his BFA from the School of Visual Arts. Although, did you study with Will there, or?
You know, it was one of those where, unfortunately, at that time, I didn't know who he was because I was specifically a Marvel guy. So I kind of leisurely tried to sign up for his classes, and people had like spent the night, at the bursar's office to sign up. So I never got to take him. I didn't get to meet him until years after I graduated.
Okay, well, I want to hear about that later, but let me introduce the rest of the guys. Luen Yang writes and sometimes draws comics and graphic novels. His first graphic novel, American-Born Chinese, was a National Book Award finalist, as well as the winner of, appropriately enough, an Eisner Award. His 2-volume Boxers and Saints won the Los Angeles Times Book Prize. His other works include, this guy is the busiest man in show business, The Shadow Hero with Sonny Liu, New Superman from DC Comics with various artists, and the Avatar: The Last Airbender series from Dark Horse with a Juri Hero. Are you coming even close to pronouncing that name right?
I'm not positive, but I think it's Gurihiro. I mean, it's Japanese, right? And I have literally zero Japanese knowledge in me, so.
I'm sure people will let me know, people watching will let me know. He was the 5th National Ambassador for Young People's Literature, and in 2016 was named the MacArthur Foundation Fellow. But unlike Jerry, he left the award open for other people to win at other times. So, Dan Schkade is a freelance cartoonist from Austin, Texas. His credits include the Eisner and Ringo Award-nominated webtoon series Lavender Jack, Will Eisner's The Spirit Returns, San Hannibal, and The Private Files of the Fowl, among others. He's a member at large of the comic creator collective Helioscope. Did I leave anything out?
No, that's everything.
Okay. Hi, guys. So as we discussed before we started recording, I've put together a PowerPoint of Will's work and your work, and I figure we can go through it and just sort of talk about Will and you and how they relate, and then I have some actual list of questions for if we get through the PowerPoint in this in time. Will Eisner, the Next Generation, that's the name of the. So for the possible, since New York Comic Con is viewed by people with all sorts of different backgrounds and interests, I'm just going to give a very, very super quick Will Eisner 101. Eisner was a writer, artist, packager, innovator in the golden age of comics, most famous for the Spirit, and the Spirit was most famous for the innovative splash pages and logos and film noir air. Also famous for design and using the logo differently every week. It came out weekly. It was basically packaged by a newspaper syndicate starting in 1940 to compete with the comic book fad that those crazy kids were all agog over. So you can see the craftsmanship, the art. This was one of Will's own favorite stories about someone named Gerhard Schnabel, and as you can see, this is not a funny story about a young man who discovers as a child he can fly, but is forced by society to hide his great skill. And I'm looking at this, and we'll talk as much for the themes of self-realization and what it means to fulfill your own destiny, as well as the design. I mean, Eisner was at least a triple threat with writing and art and design and concepts. This is one of the more famous Spirit stories called 10 Minutes. Of course, what are the 10 minutes in a man's life? Well, I guess he kind of Will telegraphs it, the last 10 minutes in Freddie's life. And you can see it evokes the Bronx, and really specifically the Jewish Bronx of the 20s and 30s and of Eisner's childhood. Jules Pfeiffer was involved with writing this story, but channeling it through Will. This is more of the story where Will kind of sets up the atmosphere of this neighborhood candy and soda and magazine store, where a holdup goes wrong and turns into a murder. And you can just, again, you can see the many levels it's working on. I know one of you, when I'd spoken to you a few months ago for Will Eisner Week, talked about a page, it was either Jerry or Gene, I think, about a page where you hear the footsteps. I'm not sure if this is the one you had in mind. Was that you, Gene?
It was actually one with octopus moving.
Oh.
It was like these big wet footsteps. But I mean, he experimented with that kind of stuff all over the place.
And let me see. And then so this is Will Eisner from like 1940 to 52. Then he went into doing something called PS Magazine for the military and a ton of other stuff. And then he kind of reinvented the medium in the 70s, in 1978, with A Contract with God, which was not, the actual first thing ever to be called a graphic novel. That's still debated online way more than anybody, needs to spend their time on. But this was the one that popularized the term, and this was a not autobiographical. It was semi-autobiographical. There were 4 different stories in Contract with God. This is the title story, Contract with God, about a Orthodox Jewish man whose daughter is taken from him at a young age, and he loses his faith. This is a character in the same tenement in the Bronx, on a fictional street in the Bronx, based on Will himself. So you can sort of just see, this is the heart of the storm. That's probably Will's most autobiographical work, about his time in the army, and then flashing back to his father's life in Europe. And then Will also had an aspect as a teacher, teaching at SVA, everybody except Jerry, and then and writing these textbooks. So don't know if anybody, is there anything anybody wants to say about any of those images or about Will or the spirit or before, and that's why we're here. So is any thought that sparked?
Well, the spirit is, I'm a huge fan of Will Eisner in general, but obviously I got a special connection to the spirit because I drew the comic for a year. But the thing that is, I think, hard for modern audiences to grasp is that what can make a comic great wasn't the characters or some kind of overall plot line, but it was just the comic's perspective. And apologies. And I think that, yeah, stuff like even this this story, Sans Serif, which is like, if you were gonna like make an important spirit story specifically about the spirit list, this would be on it. But it's not even mainly about fighting crime. It's about memories from his childhood. And I think that vibe is what sets the spirit apart, but it's also an example of what makes Eisner unique as a storyteller, especially from his time.
Yeah, well, the spirit very often was a guest star in his own story, or would come in at the very beginning and the very end, and really it was a character study of one or more of the characters, including the villains or incidental characters.
And who among us hasn't felt like a guest star in our own strip sometimes?
There you go. Yeah, Danny, when you talked about triple threat, that is what grabs me so much, because you've got now the plot and the story, but the dialogue as well, you know, the language, like just every part of every facet of that. And then not just the art and the pen stroke, but then, you know, the blacks, the whites, the grays, the shadows, the highlights, you know, and then you have the design itself, like this one here, the bottom one has no panel lines, no border at all. And he just broke like all of those and just took it to the next level. So that's why I've been a fan.
I totally agree with that. I think next level is a great way of describing Will Eisner. I think, you know, I think there's always this temptation when you figure something out, when you feel like you've gotten good at something, to just repeat it over and over and over again. But I just don't think Eisner did that, right? I think he started off at a pretty high level, especially when you compare him to his cohort, to the other artists who were working at the time. And he just kept pushing it. Like, he didn't take anything for granted. He pushed his lettering, he pushed his paneling, he pushed all of it. The way he staged the panels, everything was just so far ahead of his time. I think it's hard for us to really understand it because the rest of us have stolen so much of his innovations, right? So many of his innovations have just become commonplace now. But when he figured it out, he was often the only one that was doing that kind of stuff.
This is true. And then, so Gene, as long as you have the floor, this is the time you met Will?
Yeah. I was that was like one of my first Comic-Cons, I think. And he was just like walking around the floor. I was stunned that there was not this giant crowd around him, but people would come up to him and ask him for photographs and autographs. And he was always so gracious. So I think I said like 4 words to him because I was too intimidated, and then I ran away. But I'll never forget. I'm so glad I got that photo, you know. I'll never forget meeting him.
That's so I'll kind of flip through, you know, or we don't have to flip through, but I mean, say Will was not a big fan of the superhero, although he did do some superhero work and some of which blew up in his face, but it was always terrific looking. And so Gene, you in a way almost have kind of that dichotomy that Will had, except collapsed into a shorter number of years, where you know, everything you do is heartfelt and personal, but some of it is in genre and some of it is either autobiographical or personal in a way that, say, a genre superhero is. And so I'm going to show the folks kind of a bunch of. Let me go through the.
Yeah, that art that you have up on the screen, though, is by the amazing Sonny Liu, who won like 1 billion different Eisner Awards for a book that he did called Charlie Chan Hawk Chai. Amazing book. And I think if you look at Sunny's stuff, it feels at least inspired by Eisner in the way he experiments. He experiments with the same sorts of things. Sunny does all these crazy page layouts, and he's constantly trying to figure out non-traditional ways of getting your eye to move across the page. I think all of that is very Eisner-esque.
One of the core visual elements of Eisner is this sort of soppy goopiness. Like he's not a very rigid straight line guy. Like his worlds are they're not just tactile, they're tactile and like smudged and kind of falling apart. And I think that's something like Sunny's really able to capture. Like these are very, like I can, not only can I smell the rain, but like I'm irritated and I'm being rained on.
Yeah, that's right.
Gee, when you wrote the script, did the word Eisner come up in the art directions or any discussions?
Oh, I don't think we talked explicitly about Eisner, but Sunny knows his comics. I feel like anybody who knows his comics it's sort of like, I feel like the same way about Jack Kirby, right? Even if you're not a superhero fan, if you're working in comics, even if you don't know it, you're influenced by Jack Kirby. And even if you don't know it, you're influenced by Eisner.
Right.
Yeah, but Sunny's pretty, like he does all of that experimental stuff.
Now, I picked this image because that character in the upper left certainly owes something to the Spirit.
Yeah, except he's a bad guy, whereas Spirit, I guess Spirit, I mean, he is dressed up a little bit like a prototypical criminal from the 1940s, right? Except he fights on the side of the good.
Right. Well, the legend is that the syndicate, I think the Register and Tribune syndicate, hired Will to sort of compete with Superman, Batman, and the whole superhero fad. And Will really didn't care much for superheroes, but sort of he grudgingly put a mask and gloves on this character, and said, "How's that for I think they called them costume adventurers then?" And they were like, "Okay, I guess you know best." Now, and so this is something you've done that's, again, not with art by you. We'll get to the stuff with art by you. But I mean, again, it's almost a transition. It's a superhero story, but it's also obviously got a lot more going on. And I think that reflects, especially, it seems to me, I mean, tell me if Will's social consciousness of the graphic novels. It's a little more subtle in the Spirit, but I mean, was there any sense of channeling any aspect of Will?
Yeah, I mean, I think Will was one of the first people who believed that comics could tackle deep subjects, right? Comics could tackle subjects of substance. And that's something I think we take for granted now in 2021. But when he was saying it back in the 1940s and 50s, he was one of the few. He sort of, over several decades, he kind of evangelized enough where people started to see comics the way he did. I think Superman Smashes the Klan with the art, with art by the amazing Gurihiru is us trying to follow in that tradition.
Right. And then there's something, I mean, obviously Eisner, again, not known for superheroes, not liking them, but there's something, what is the new Superman and how does it fit into, he's clearly Asian. What was the thinking? What's the story with this character?
New Superman is actually, he's not my idea. DC Comics called me up one afternoon and they're like, "What do you think if we do a Chinese Superman?" And I was like, that sounds like a terrible idea. I want nothing to do with it. But then I had like several conversations with them. And eventually they convinced me. So that's what it is. It's New Superman is a 24-issue series. It's about a 17-year-old kid growing up in Shanghai who inherits some of Clark Kent's powers. So how the Superman, the original Superman, dies every 5 years. So he died in 2016 and some of his powers went into this kid in Shanghai. And it's kind of about him becoming a hero. He's kind of a jerk, he's kind of a bully. It's a little bit like Flash Thompson becoming a hero. So it's about him kind of figuring out what it means to be a hero. But one of the I've been writing for DC for about 5 years now, and one of the pieces in one of the toys in the DC toy box that I still really want to play with are the Freedom Fighters, who I've always loved. did not realize they were Will Eisner creations until I was much older.
The Freedom, that's like Uncle Sam, the Human Bomb,
Yeah,
the
that's
Phantom
right.
Lady. Oh,
Yeah, yeah,
that'd be cool. I'd love to see it
yeah.
given those toys. That'd be sick.
Interesting. Okay, so in a way, this would sort of almost be your answer to like Will's packaging all those comics that weren't the Spirit, the Black Hawk and
Yeah, Black Hawk. That's right. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, well, it's I think it's also, I mean, it's both it's interesting both in terms of diversity and then in terms of DC thinking, oh look, there's a Chinese market of a billion people who could sell comic books too. So
Yeah.
is it actually available in China?
That I'm not sure. I do hear from Chinese readers every now and then, and some of them are really supportive of it. They like it. Others say, well, it reads kind of like it was written by somebody who lives in America, which is totally true.
All right, and then here we get to the stuff. Now, to me, this and look, I'm stacking the deck. All the images I picked, certainly of the stuff that you guys each drew on your own, to me is somehow evocative of Eisner. So even though this is a little more classic cartooning, I don't know, to me, just the way it's laid out and in your face kind of felt like Will. Am I getting what I'm supposed to get?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of playing with the form. I was, especially when I was just starting off self-publishing comics in my 20s, I was hugely influenced by those Eisner Spirit splash pages, and just the sheer innovation that went into them. I used to hang out with this group of cartoonists. We all lived in the Bay Area. We were all in our 20s. We were, all kind of getting started. And we used to pass those around. We used to pass those images around and talk about how we could do those same sorts of things. Now, I don't think I was able to get close to the creativity that Will Eisner showed in his layouts, but it was definitely on my mind. It was always on my mind, that example.
Yeah, and this, I mean, so I'll just kind of go through these. I think the drama that you put in this, I know in some of your work, you almost channel more of the later Eisner and you set the camera down straight and it's a straight on, but some of this, no, I wouldn't say it's imitating the Spirit, but it almost evokes it with the angles and the drama and the reaction shots.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that is about this page specifically, one thing that really impressed me with Eisner's stuff when I was reading it as a teenager was how he used his sound effects. Like sound is not a thing that exists in comics, but
right.
It's so important in those Spirit comics. It's almost like sometimes in some of those stories, it's almost like another character. So right. the click clack here was something that I wanted to use throughout the book for different things.
And there's such artistry to it, like the sniff sniff here. I can hear that in my head, but if I'm reading a Cape comic, I can read like cock-a-boom and it doesn't mean anything to me. But these, if you do it properly as a sound, like you don't even have to think about it. An onomatopoeia, the way it's drawn in place, it just pops into your head and creates that reality.
So again, I'm kind of loading the deck here. I mean, Eisner, a lot of the graphic novels are about growing up as the children of Jewish immigrants in the Bronx and partly in Brooklyn, mostly in the Bronx. So I know this is not a New York story, but again, I sort of does Eisner resonate when you're telling a story like this?
Yeah, I mean, I really love the way he pulls from, like, he uses his memories from childhood as like raw material, right? And that's what I'm doing here as well. So I didn't grow up on the East Coast like he did. I grew up in a suburb in the San Jose area in California. But that lunch table, I ate at that lunch table, K through 6. That was my lunch table.
Well, the angle you've drawn that at, that's the most dramatic lunch table I've ever seen. Like I'm getting splinters just looking at it, and then here again, there's and I'm not trying to imply that you guys sat with an Eisner book on your desk and copy, but I'm just trying to sort of get us what seems to me channeling some of the stuff. So this feels like some of Will's more epic work.
Yeah, there is a section in comics and sequential art where he does talk about the bird's eye view and worm's eye view, and I could still picture that page, right? Because the way he illustrated it was so evocative, and I don't think I'm skilled enough to pull off like a true worm's eye view the way he does. But it's still I'm trying in that first panel right there. I am trying.
This from Boxers and Saints, by the way.
Yeah, that's right. That's from Boxers and Saints.
So is this, and again, this almost feels like some of the flashbacks of the scene where the lead character is writing the contract with God. I think that takes place in a forest.
Yeah, I could tell you this, especially drawing Boxers and Saints, where there were a lot of historical. There's a lot of historical clothing, right? It was set in the story is set in the 1900s in China. And if there's one thing, like if they're the comic gods and I could ask the comic gods for one blessing, I would want to be blessed with, Eisner's ability to draw like folds in clothing. I've always been so jealous of the way he can draw folds in clothing.
Mm-hmm.
And this is one of your more recent, or maybe it's your most recent thing, Dragon Hoops. And something about the cover. I mean, I don't know if you designed the cover, but that somehow felt like a kind of very bold, direct kind of Eisner design to me.
So I actually don't have much to do with the cover except for emailing back and saying, "Oh, this looks great." That was done by a guy named Kurt Benshoff, who works for First Second Books, the publishers of Dragon Hoops. And I could see why you're seeing an Eisner influence here because of those spirit splash pages, right? Where the word spirit was kind of embedded into actual objects. That's exactly what Kurt did here. He embedded the title of the book into this cover that feels like a basketball. Like if you actually feel it in your hand, I don't know how he did this, but he made it feel like the texture of an actual basketball.
Yeah, no, it was like a clever thing to do. And this, I know that it seems to me you intentionally drew a lot of the book from, again, like more of an Eisner graphic novel, but in the sense that you plant the camera center stage and turn it on. But this had sort of to me anyway, an Eisner-y kind of feel. I don't know. Am I?
Yeah, like I said, had I been a stronger artist, I think especially for that second panel, I would have positioned the camera a little bit lower to the ground. But like some of that stuff, I don't know how Eisner was able to pull it off, right? I felt like he understood human anatomy so well that he could put the camera anywhere he wanted and it would still look okay.
It's worth remembering that during the Spirit, Eisner had a bunch of other talented artists who he was cross-pollinating with. You had Lou Fine, you had Jack Cole for a while. There are a lot of really talented people. There was I can't remember his name. There was an older artist who was working with him who was like a classically trained muralist, and a lot of the really good anatomical stuff in the Spirit was informed by him. So it's
that's interesting. I'm trying to think of who that is, and I can't. But
I have a copy of The Dreamer that says it, and it's like just out of reach.
Obviously, Kirby was there, and at different points,
right?
Al Jaffe. Bob, not Bob Powell.
Oh, maybe no.
Anyway,
it doesn't matter.
Okay, so let's move on to Jerry. So and there's your Newbery. So Jerry, I mean, I think there's, we'll talk about your design of these. It seems like you're building, recognizable theme. Any Eisner influence, or am I grabbing it?
Well, what's so funny is, like I said, I was a real Marvel guy. So I was like a John Buscema, Gil Kane, Michael Golden, like those guys. But at the same time, I like comic strips. So, like Walt Kelly's Pogo, Calvin and Hobbes, that kind of thing. So I didn't really go back into the non-superhero stuff until I was practically an adult. So when I started seeing middle grade graphic novels, I guess I got the Eisner influence on kind of a trickle down theory from Mr. Gene Yang. So when I was designing New Kid, I was heavily influenced by American Born Chinese, even to the fact of like not having the full character of Jordan on here. I have him cut off at the knees and, just kind of to the side. And even going against the grain, I remember my agent initially was like, yeah, I don't know if you can put black on a middle grade book. I said, well, let me try. We got the black side, we got the white side, and Jordan's kind of right in the middle, with a sketchbook. So I really started trying to think in terms of being one of those triple threats, to have the dialogue, the characters, and there aren't a lot of people who I look at and just see all of that, and even as far as like the layout of the page as well. I didn't do that with the superhero guys, but I've done that when I did discover Will Eisner and then Gene Yang and someone like a David Small, like those kind of people that really pushed everything to their fullest. And that was kind of what got my juices flowing, where I kind of wanted to aspire to be one of those guys.
But I mean, it's like one of you said before, whether you knew it or not, you were influenced by Eisner and by Kirby. By the way, I want to apologize for my completely unsubtle transition from Gene to Jerry. I just went, well, that was blunt. That was well, I should have done that. I should have done that more suavely, but I'm doing the best I can. Anyway, but back to Jerry.
You're gonna be on my toes now. Like, all right, when's it me?
Right.
But
right then, you're up now. Go.
I got it. So the black background on New Kid was considered too somber for a kid's book.
Yeah, initially they thought that there'd be pushback because a lot of the
That's so
the
weird.
middle grade books have like a light blue, kind of spearmint green, light purple, that kind of thing.
Right.
And I just wanted to come in with black and white, because that also is kind of the subject matter of the book.
Makes the Newberry pop.
Yeah, really.
Exactly. Now, I didn't do that with that in mind you. But yeah, it was just, I just wanted to be different. I wanted to really push it to get something.
That's one of those rules I've never heard and can never imagine. But I'm sure there were many meetings and consultants brought in about, we should never use black on a cover because it doesn't work except when it does.
Yeah, exactly.
So again, I've got a bunch of. So this is New York. This is the Bronx. This is not Will Eisner's Bronx, but it's a Bronx. So at this point, even when doing this, were you must have had some awareness of Will and his work?
Yes. Oh, now by this time, absolutely. I had poured through comics and sequential art, so I learned kind of with how to draw comics the Marvel way, and went a little crazy with that, and was honed in by comics and sequential art by Will Eisner. And what I mean by that was, when I read the Marvel way, then I tried to pop everything, just this one sideways and boom and coming through, boom, 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 boom. And then with comics and sequential art, which I have in front of me, there was the whole part about, sometimes mundane is exciting. There's some excitement in that. You draw something boring, and then boom, and then it adds like twice as much emphasis. Whereas if every panel is sideways and going this way, then it's hard to differentiate when you really want something to be exciting. So just here, just the tenderness of the grandmother touching kind of his ear, because Will, like the family aspect, especially with the elders, fathers, grandfathers, was like a really, really important thing that I always got. So little things like me not finishing the word balloons, the little shadow from the Venetian blinds, the kiss on the grandmother's cheek, and then the silhouette walking away with the shadow are all kind of eyes. And now the buildings, just the perspective, trying to be a little different, but I didn't put nearly the detail that he would have in his Bronx.
but it's got that feel. It's got that Eisner
Right.
feel. So, and then this is now this is technically Washington Heights. This scene.
Yes. So that is actually the house where I was born and grew up, which still stands in Washington Heights, the brownstone. And yeah, kind of Jordan squatting on his stool with the book, again, nothing in the background, just kind of focused on him. Now, Will probably would have done that with the gray background, so it just kind of blended a little bit more. But, now I get a little bit more into the detail where you see the little fence, you see the cobblestones, you see like the little parts by the window and the door and the planters, and then, incidental characters, this woman jogging with a dog in the front, and then the perspective of Jordan Banks drawing on his sketchbook in the bottom left that's kind of pointing to mom and the dad, just kind of like having a little bit more perspective and not necessarily having to show him. Like one of the panels that you showed the Will, it's just had the main character's foot walking off the page, so it's like, okay, I'm just doing his hand, and the book kind of points into everything. It's kind of a nice little triangle that takes your eye right to the computer screen.
Right, and you have the point of view character who, is you, I guess, at a younger age, drawing. It's
Right.
That's a very Will kind of thing. That sort of meta thing of the protagonist being an artist. And this I isolated this out. It's dealing with the ethnic and racial tension, even if it's a subtext. Sort of has an Eisner
Yeah.
vibe to it.
And then again, the father and the son. I love the father and son interplays throughout his books. Whether it's the dad going to fight the bully to protect the son, or the son wanting to do something for his dad. The little bars on the windows, even taking the time to put the windshield wipers on the car, which nobody will take the time to appreciate, you know. And then the neighbor kind of sweeping with her gloves on, sweeping the front porch, just to kind of show that the neighbors do actually care about that stuff. So it kind of sets the tone of the neighborhood. Will and I was also a big like Norman Rockwell fan in the sense of you could see so much. Like if somebody was tired, they didn't just look tired, they looked exhausted. So in the panel that you just showed, where Jordan Banks has his head like cocked back,
Right.
it's just like, oh, come on, please, can we just go on, mom? I don't want to go to the school.
Well, kind of what you I think have in common with Will is seems like your mother or Jordan's mother, let's is kind of the more practical, business minded, and the father was kind of a little bit more of a dreamer.
A
And
dreamer. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that's definitely me even now as an adult is still to dream. I think my kids, were the ones that always reined me in. I'm like, hey, we can do this, 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 this. I'm like, Dad, maybe not. Like, hey, who's the kid? Who's the grown man?
so, and then this is,
Wow.
again, this is all the different. I guess it's the same group of kids moving through space and time.
Yeah, so this is a double page spread that, again, to seeing the Rainers and the Gene Yangs. I was like, okay, this is my first book. New Kid was my first like real break. I was like, okay, I have to come strong with this. So, having it start from the upper left, so it splits down the middle, so left side, right side, and having it go across the page and going to the right page and curving down and going around to the left and then ending on the right, of really taking the reader's eye, and then by having, I went and researched, I found those lamps in Central Park, took pictures of them, but then also a little bit of fantasy there where the girl with the puppet on her hand is so happy that she got invited to walk with Jordan and Drew that she's literally floating on the ground, off the ground, you know.
And
And then
the thanks guys with the puppet is such a great button to put on the page.
yeah, you know, like the having like
Oh, and I'm sorry, I just noticed that the word balloon's going to the puppet. That's a great, I love that. That's a great little touch.
oh
The page is a really an Eisnerian lesson in balloon placement too, and having your eye follow the balloons correctly around this double page spread.
yeah, and I know if you didn't grow up with comics, like reading the balloons is the one of the hardest things for teachers, you know, like middle-aged teachers are like, look, I did not grow up reading comics. I didn't know what to read first. And so I really kind of wanted to like, okay, let's test you out here, you know. And sometimes I do put arrows like, okay, read here first and read here. But this one I just kind of wanted to do that. And then yeah, like you said, the little arrow going to the puppet in the bottom right, having like little Easter eggs and you know the fall foliage and you know the shadows. So I had a lot of fun with this page. It's one of my favorites.
And by the way, I just want to, we're probably going to go a little long. So, A, if you could stick around, I would appreciate it. It won't go too long. Also, anything we don't get to use in the New York Comic Con will not go to waste. It will certainly go up for Will Eisner Week. Does anybody have to go at the crack of 5:30? Or can we? I will. We'll wrap it up. We'll give
I've got
short.
some wiggle room.
Yeah.
Huh?
I set aside 6 hours for this, so I got four more hours,
Oh,
Danny.
you've done panels with me before. Okay, so that we'll give short shrift to that. No, we won't. That's so again, anything you want to say about this? Again, struck me as kind of an Eisner kind of mix of detail with abstraction and a lot of emotion.
Yeah, well, thank you. Yeah, you know, the hug of the mom, letting her kid go off to school, you know, the bear hug, the ding dong really big, some of the panels falling off. Jimmy Gallenly is another guy who I think really takes his word balloons and make them art. You know, his word balloons are art as well. And so I really wanted to kind of have fun with that. And, you know, the dad walking down the stairs and like the mirrors in the back and a lot of details. So yeah, and again, those little private conversations with the dad and Jordan.
Yeah, that like so you good. That's so perfect. Like I can
I'm sorry.
so, I was just it's just such a nice little way to lay that out. I love it.
And the thing with the finger covering the lens, it's it's very relatable and it's very Eisnery.
Yeah, thank you. That's as big a oh yeah, this is yeah.
This,
So this Jordan, hey, you gonna go out for the team? No, I'm gonna play Alexander Hamilton and George Washington musical, or at least play cello in the orchestra. But I kind of like squash. Do you? They're trying to find like two of the only black kids in the class, and they're trying to find something that they have in common. I kind of like squash. Do you? No, I'm more of a broccoli guy. Yeah. So nice meeting you, Jordan. So literally, like these kids are on from two different worlds, you know. But again, the putting like the black, you know, in there. I also got to learn to use white space a little better as I got older. But then also the black that goes, you know, to the bleed. You know, characters in the background just sitting on the little stone fence. And then the fantasy things, I have the two little cherubs, these little angels that kind of follow Jordan around that kind of highlight when he's happy and when he's miserable. So yeah, all things that I just wanted to have it because talking about race and class could be seen as like such a like downer of a book. So I really wanted to add these kind of fantasy elements to show like, look, we're going to have some serious conversations, but it's not going to depress you. Like we're going to have some jokes, we're going to have some fun. There's some cringeworthy stuff in there, but you know, we'll all get through this as friends.
And it's comics. I mean, you can't, you couldn't do this. I mean, you could do a version of it, but it's something that so exists as comics, as purely as comics. And
Yeah.
I mean, I know maybe I'm, because it's the theme of the panel, but it does seem like an Eisner thing. Although standing on planets, it seems almost like a Marvel thing in a way. It's
Yeah.
Seems
No,
like
it
a
wouldn't be the
Watcher and
same.
Galactus thing, you know.
Right, right. He's Galactus and the High Evolutionary. No, it definitely would not have been the same if if this had just been a book in prose.
Okay, well, thank you. Now I'm going to make a much more smooth transition from Jerry to Dan Schkade, who's been waiting so patiently. And look, it's a picture of Dan Schkade.
Woo!
That's right. That was in the end of season Q&A for the last season of Lavender Jack. That would have been last October, and I haven't had a haircut since then either.
Well, it looks good both ways, but I mean, I picked this, something about this called out Eisner to me, you know, if only having the name of the title character in the word balloon and the word balloon, you know, the shape of the balloons and the way they connect. Well, I'll shut up. You tell me.
Well, I've got for Eisner Week a couple years ago, the poster art for it was this spirit splash page, and it's Will Eisner. His back's to the camera. He's sitting down at a desk. It's, you know, big drawing desk with little scraps of notes and ink everywhere, and the floor is just littered with little like letters, notes like, Eisner, you're late. Where's the spirit? Like just these like scraps of blown deadline notices. Right. And that's sort of like, it's like a visual mantra I focus on. So whenever I draw myself in Lavender Jack, which is set in the early 1900s, so that I draw myself like a workaday artist from that period of time, I always try and lean into that sort of self-deprecating way of drawing myself that Eisner did.
But you don't have Jules Pfeiffer coming in and assassinating you, do you?
No, that's next season.
That's next season. Okay, Eisner did that in one spirit story.
Yes.
So this, I mean, now of everybody here, and you know, so many other artists are influenced by Will. You went right to the source. How did you end up being the artist on the Spirit series, and then kind of channeling your own version of Will's world?
Well, Matt Wagner had agreed to write the Spirit for Dynamite. This was to coincide with the 75th anniversary of the Spirit. And this was my test page for that, actually. Wow. Matt had written a test script. It was just 4 subjects. It was, you know, the Spirit running from a train. He crashes into a window. He sees some goons have a lady tied up and he fights them. And Matt had said in the script, and just however many pages you want to do, expand to however many panels. This is just the information it has to contain. And I looked at it and I realized, if you were smart, you could do this in just 4 panels. I don't mean if you were smart. I mean, like, there's a way you could do it if you bent reality a little bit. And so I did this page, and it turns out it was like a secret test that Matt had put out to see if somebody could like condense the information like Eisner would have.
Were you waiting your whole life to draw the Spirit? Or, I mean,
oh yeah. I found in high school, I was very like, I really liked Garth Ennis. I was really into the Punisher, and like the Shadow, and like all these like angry Justice Bang Bang characters. And I found the Spirit, and it was sort of, I don't know, I feel like it kind of set me right. Like because you can't read a Punisher comic without buying into a certain amount of desensitivity to other people's personhood, I think is how I'll put it. And in the Spirit, everybody's personalized. In the page with the walking feet, the tick tick walking feet, the narrator of the page gets that you showed at the beginning of the slideshow. The narrator of the page gets spooked by the cat, and like says, oh, he says something like, oh, sorry, anyway, so back to the rain slicked streets. So like even the comic itself is personalized in the comic, and it just opened my eyes up to how comics could be different. And the idea of combining that kind of humanist writing with cape comics is sort of the niche I think I've carved out for myself.
I love that you did this homage.
Yeah, Matt asked for that exactly. I messed up though. If I had my wits about me, I would have adjusted it so that the window filled more of the page, because the dead space on the wall was, you know, narration in the original.
Right. You also you've got to make the spirit look exactly like Victor Mature as well. You know, that was the other. But that's, I mean, it's not, you know. So I mean, that discovering the spirit. I mean, you're, you know, when my generation discovered the spirit, it was in Jules Feiffer's Great Comic Book Heroes when he printed that spirit story, which I had no idea that the spirit existed, that Will Eisner existed, and suddenly there was this thing, and I had to know more about Will, and it, you know, it's just very cool that, you know, that it didn't stop with the baby boomers, that it's continued with you guys, you know, and beyond. Tell me a little bit about this. Now, Lavender Jack is on. It's like a scrolling web saga. It's
Webtoon. It's all one long vertical scroll.
So, I would think that must make it challenging, even if you wanted to homage Eisner. You know, he didn't work in that kind of format, although he certainly loved, you know, new things and new possibilities. So I think it's in the Eisner tradition. But this was an image I was able to find that screamed Eisner to me.
Well, I think honestly, I used a ton of Eisner techniques
Yeah.
in Lavender Jack, because for Eisner, it was all about transition and juxtaposition. Like he tried to communicate just heaps of information to you in as little time as possible. Like he's one of those guys. I think he even said in an interview that depending on which type of window and chair you draw in a black space, you can either set a story in Timbuktu or Chicago. And because this is, you know, I draw this comic every week. It has to be at least 40 panels, which is about 7 to 8 pages of normal comic book content.
That's about the amount of the spirit was 7 to 8 pages a week.
Exactly. Now the spirit was denser than I get to be, because I'm drawing for a modern, fairly young audience, and there's a limit on how many word balloons I can use.
Right.
But it is definitely like Eisner's trying to find ways to just, you know, heap information onto you, and looking at techniques he used to not just communicate, here's the setting, but here's how you should feel about it. Here's the drama. Here's the emotional scope. I pull a lot from the spirit specifically.
Yeah, no, I was gonna say it's definitely more the spirit than. And here's another one that, you know, that sort of Eisner by way of maybe John Romita or something.
Yeah, I study a lot of action cinematography. Like I watch a lot of interviews with like second unit directors,
right?
Because a lot of these guys are also constrained by what angles they can use, how much time they have to execute a bit of action. I read a lot of interviews with low budget film directors, and it's things like that make me realize, okay, we don't have the budget to do a long fight scene. So how can I pick like 5 important beats to communicate this scene, and then have the rest of the episode to have this argument I need the characters to have?
I'm sorry.
I'm not like struggling to meet 40 panels every week. I'm struggling to like keep it down to 40.
That's a good level of enthusiasm. Well, listen, and Eisner, you know, that generation, and I guess every generation, but really that generation was so influenced by the movies of the time. You know, I mean, often Wells and Eisner are often compared. And I see a lot of Wells. I think it's, you know, especially see The Third Man, which was starring Wells, not directed by Wells, but you know, I see a lot of film by way of Eisner, which is appropriate because that's what Eisner did. And then this, you know, again, you know, this is sort of out of the Eisner playbook. I think the use of type as design and story element.
Well, and the willingness to get a little bit silly with it, like to caricaturize, that's not how you use that word, to make a caricature of a situation. Like if I was making a realistic newspaper headline or a newspaper illustration, it would be a lot more reserved than this.
Right.
But I'm trying to keep up a certain amount of unreality and energy. So I do it like this. And the reason that the header of the newspaper is so big is because you're scrolling, and when you're scrolling, it doesn't look as big.
Yeah, that's a whole other set of considerations. Boy, that's
Yeah.
and then I found this on the internet. I you know, it said Eisner and the Spirit to me, but obviously, I guess Columbo. Tell me, is this your homage to Peter Falk?
Yeah. I on Twitter, I had referred to, I put up a panel from Lavender Jack where a cop is leaving a room and the person that she's been interviewing stops her and says, "Hey, one more thing." And I called it the reverse Columbo. And somebody replied with Umbulok. And it just sounded like an evil entity, like a Stephen King monster. And so I drew this, and it got unexpectedly popular, and now it's a shirt.
That's great.
But it's also very Eisner-y. I'm using those techniques to crank this out in half an hour.
And you even used, you know, Columbo's missing eye as a very terrifying aspect. Not Columbo, I mean Columbo by what Peter Falk's missing eye. And
Yes, he sacrificed his eye to obtain an unspeakable power.
Well, there you go. Okay. That happens. Okay. And I'll see you in the funny papers. A little over time, so I guess I'll just go around.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Danny.
So I think we've kind of shown how Will's, I say spirit lives on, but I'd love you guys to just say something maybe about Will's legacy and where comics goes from here, informed by Will, or something even better than that dumb question. But I'll start. Jerry, you want to?
Yeah, I think I'm pretty happy with the way that comics are, you know, it seems like now being considered real reading, you know, and real books. There are more and more teachers and librarians that are championing our cause. There are a lot of kids that, you know, when I was in 7th grade, my teachers would confiscate our comics, saying that they would rot our brain. And now there are a lot of teachers and librarians saying, hey, you know, there's a kid in my class and he has never finished a book. And he has read, you know, such and such a graphic novel 4 times or 5 times, you know, because so much of what, you know, my vocabulary and reading skills were developed from comics. And then I feel like, you know, when you take the story and it's married to a proper art form, and, you know, you have some fun and you really get these stories that whether you are, you know, like in Will's case, you know, the Jewish Bronx, as you say, like I read those stories and I felt like I was there. It's like me and my dad, and showing that certain stories are in fact universal. And I think that it just ties everything together neatly. And, you know, I think his legacy is definitely strong.
Thank you, Dan. I will go over to you. Do you have any thoughts on Will and his legacy and any other profound things?
Well, I think that, like you say, it's hard to get away from Will as an influence because, you know, people, Mike Mignola, Frank Miller, like any book you can reliably find in a Barnes and Noble is inflected, especially any American comic is inextricably tied to Eisner's work. And I do think that, like, I dig superhero stories a lot, but they only work when there's a human heart to them. And when something starts being empty and dumb, you know, whether or not it's wearing a cape, is when you lose track of that. It's when you know, when you throw a bus at, like, I always think about when Superman will throw a car at somebody. I'm like, that's somebody's whole life. That's like they have the birth certificate in there because they were gonna like get their license renewed. Like when you lose track of the human perspective, that's when you stop communicating with the audience. And I think that, I don't know, if nothing else, if there's any any other cartoonists, artists or writers, listening, real quick, just brush up on a Will Eisner story just to see if you notice anything that story has that your work is missing.
Wow, I love that. Thank you. And Gene, any thoughts on Will and the future and etc.?
I really love what both Dan and Jerry said. Dan, by the way, those are some gorgeous pictures. I think you definitely have mastered that light and shadow thing that Will did so well.
That means a lot.
Really
Thank you.
Gorgeous stuff.
Yeah.
But what Dan said about broadening the perspective of the story that you work on, I think that's very Eisner-y. I think that's something that all of us who are working cartoonists can learn from. And what Jerry said about how people are taking comics as literature seriously now, that's something that, like I said, Will was an advocate of before almost anybody else. In a lot of ways, I think we are living out Will's vision for the medium. I do think we have growth areas, though. I think that I think that right now there is a lot of acceptance for literary graphic novels and literary comics for young people. I don't think we're totally there yet, at least in America, for when it comes to literary comics for adults. And I think Will was tackling that, right, with Contract with God, with all that stuff that he did later in life. That's the frontier that I hope that we as working cartoonists will tackle next.
Wow. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you. This was great. This was a great tribute to Will and great hope for the future of comics, as well as great insight into the past. So thank you, Jerry Kraft. Thank you, Gene Luen Yang. Thank you, Dan Schkade. Thank you, Judith Hansen, for helping put this together. Thank you, Travis Langley, behind the scenes. Thank you, New York Comic Con, for hosting. And of course, thank you, Will Eisner, for giving us a reason to get together. Gentlemen, stay well.